Hi, my name's Steve Clapham and welcome to the latest in our investing tips series of videos. Now before I start, can I remind you, if you sign up on behindthebalance-sheet.com, you'll get loads of really useful free stuff, free newsletter, free training materials, and if you want to invest a bit of money in your future and in your investing skills, then we've got lots of courses for private investors. Do check them out on behindthebalance-sheet.com. But let's get on with the latest video in our series of investing tips, and we're going through different types of moats. And this is number 3 in the series. And what we're going to talk about is brands and intellectual property. Now you remember that Warren Buffett coined the term economic moat. He said it's a structural impediment which obstructs competitors from entering your company's markets and reducing its returns on capital. And the effect is a sustainable high return on invested capital. And so what we're going to talk about today is intellectual property and brands. And previously we've talked about economies of scale and network effects. If you haven't watched those videos, do check them out. So, excuse me, we're just going to go through 3 or 4 examples. 4 examples. Tide. Now, you all know Tide, washing powder, right? And the attraction of a brand like Tide is obviously there's a huge amount of marketing and advertising expense goes into maintaining the value of this brand. But this was epitomized for me by, do you remember this? This is the Amazon Dash button that you would just fix to your washing machine, and when you ran out of Tide, you'd press that button and Amazon would automatically, through Amazon Prime, send you another box of Tide. The attraction of these sorts of brands, low cost, or not low cost, but low value brands, everyday repeatable purchases, very large markets, and your customer is locked in because they've got used to using Tide. Honestly, there's probably no difference between Tide and Ariel or any of the other brands, but you get somebody to change washing powder. Different smell, not sure what they're going to get, etc. This is another brand, but at the other end of the spectrum, other end of the price and value spectrum. Now, some would argue that a Rolex is good value because a Rolex, strangely, doesn't lose its value. Goes up. And the issue here is that people will be prepared to pay a huge premium for a Rolex watch. Now obviously there's all sorts of watch brands and all sorts of high-end expensive watches, but when it's got Rolex on it, you can charge 100 times what you can charge, certainly 10 times what you can charge if it doesn't have Rolex on it. And there are other types of intellectual property moats. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of this. Moody's is often cited as a kind of intellectual property moat. And yes, of course the brand is important. We've got a Moody's rating. But I think that the value of this brand should have been massively reduced by the CLO nonsense and the global financial crisis, because Moody's clearly didn't properly rate those instruments. Obvious. Yet Moody's is still around today, and the real reason, I think, is that there's a regulatory barrier. Jonathan Tepper talked about this in his book on the consolidation and lack of competition in US industry. So the issue with Moody's is it's one of only, I think it's less than half a dozen companies that are authorized by the relevant federal agency to issue debt ratings on quoted debt. So guess what? It's still around and still making huge amounts of money. So more fool me that I didn't buy it. And here's another type of intellectual property. Here's Qualcomm. And Qualcomm, as you know, makes chips that go in mobile phones. And Qualcomm's IP is an annuity because those chips or its chip designs are used in all these phones Most 4G phones have got a Qualcomm chip in them, I believe. And every mobile phone that gets shipped, Qualcomm, or with its chips, Qualcomm takes a royalty. And that's a very high quality, very high value recurring income stream. So what we've got 4 different examples, different types of intellectual property or brands, different values ascribed to each. And the interesting thing is that each of these brands are IP of different strengths, and each of them has a different resistance to disruption. And, you know, I could imagine that Moody's business wouldn't be around in 10 or 20 years' time. And that's, you know, perfectly conceivable because it could be removed by a regulatory event, although it's hard to imagine given the global financial crisis. But there's all sorts of changes in fintech that may make it less relevant. You know, we may be using the blockchain to lend money, and it might be done, you know, as much by retail as by institutions in 20 years' time. Who knows? But what I just wanted to leave you with was the idea that a brand isn't a guaranteed moat, and you need to understand the strength of the brand and its ability to extract an above average, above normal, supranormal price, and therefore afford its owner a high and sustainable return on invested capital, because that's what we're looking for. I hope you've enjoyed this. Tune in next time, and please, please, please don't forget, subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Thanks for watching.